Thank you very much, and good morning again to all present. And for those who have joined us online, it's really a joy to speak with you about the Commission on Caribbean Communications Resilience. And I just want to, for those of you who do not know or who are not familiar, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, it is an intergovernmental organization established by the CARICOM heads of government in 1989, yes, I thought there was something wrong. And our mission is to create an environment in partnership with members to optimize returns from ICC resources for the benefit of all stakeholders. I would like to put in the all, but we do seek to serve the whole of the Caribbean community, all stakeholders. And I think that is right. We get involved in a lot of things that are that we recognize need to be done. But there isn't necessarily any organization charged with that sort of responsibility. So I'm just going to run straight into the presentation. And for those of you who are not from the Caribbean, I want to say welcome to the Caribbean. Welcome to Suriname. Yes, it's a beautiful country. And the Caribbean, you know, when you hear the word the Caribbean, it evokes these images of white sand beaches and palm trees swaying in the balmy breezes, and it just evokes all sorts of lovely feelings. And for the most part, those are good feelings. But we do have some dark clouds hovering over us. I'm sorry to burst that idyllic sort of vision, but we do have some challenges. The tiny sizes of our countries, we have small populations, weak economies, and on the natural side of things, we have earthquakes to contend with, volcanoes, and annual tropical storms and hurricanes, which are a fact of our Caribbean existence. And the effects of climate change were manifested quite dramatically for us last year in the 2017 hurricane season. We had the passage of 2 Category 5 hurricanes and a number of storms in between. I don't know if you recall when we did the Internet Governance Forum in the British Virgin Islands in August, just days before, there was a huge storm that did a lot of damage. And then later on, we had the Irma visiting and just finishing off what that storm had started. And it has been quite a wake-up call for the Caribbean. And this is just some of the outcomes of that very, very violent hurricane season. 50% of Caribbean mobile network operators were directly impacted. There was significant irreparable damage to telecommunications infrastructure, 95% destruction in the most significantly affected markets, significant damage to the electrical infrastructure, transport and water disruption. For service operators, of course, in the countries that were most severely affected, staff were directly affected. You know, their damaged houses, their food shortages. These were realities that were faced. And then, of course, widespread telecommunications and internet service disruption. And the challenge too was the delay in restoration of the services once the hurricane had passed. And because of this, we thought, we were very concerned that in the haste to rebuild, that organizations and countries just put back what they had lost. And you don't want to do that. Because of the climate change issues, we are sure that if not this year, maybe next year or the year after, but inevitably we will be faced again with similar circumstances. So we were very concerned about this issue, that how do we build resilience into the communication networks? Because in a disaster situation, communications are vital, right? And if your network is wiped out, how do you call for help? Who do you call for help? How do you start mobilizing the necessary first responders if they do not have communication networks? So we established, the CTU established this commission on Caribbean communications resilience, and the objectives of the commission are: one, to investigate the factors that led to the connectivity outages, communication infrastructure failures, and restoration delays in the Caribbean territories impacted by the hurricanes in 2017. The second was to assess existing vulnerabilities that contributed to the infrastructure and service failures and impacted recovery and relief efforts. The third, did I do that? Okay, there. Right, the third was to review policies, infrastructure regulation, technologies and methodologies that foster greater communications network resilience. And finally, to produce a report with specific recommendations for robust and resilient Caribbean communication networks. And the commission, the composition, am I doing that? The composition of the commission, it's comprised of Caribbean organizations like the CTU, the CBU, CaribNOG, and the OECS. Also a number of internet organizations, Packet Clearinghouse, which you've heard of, and the American Registry of Internet Numbers. Some technology organizations like Cisco, and of course, we do have an academic institution. We have the University of the West Indies, is the vice chair for this commission. And the CTU has maintained the chair, but the vice chair is the University of the West Indies. And one of the things when we're talking about resilience and fostering this rapid recovery, in order to achieve that state, a lot of preparation has to be done. A lot of things have to be put in place long before there's a cloud on the horizon or that the earth shakes just a little bit. And some of the preparatory activities that have to be done is, first of all, creating that enabling environment. An enabling environment for the disaster preparedness, mitigation, and accelerated recovery. And as Sherman rightly said, the whole issue of policies are very important. And I want to say, it's something that I keep saying all the time: the world has changed. And the policies that may have served us well for the last 100 years are not, will not serve us in this age of connectivity and internet and ICT. The policies have to be reviewed, as well as the legislation and the regulations. We have to look at things as building codes, right? And update them appropriately. All of these things are absolutely necessary if we are going to be able to build that level of resiliency into our networks. And the other thing that Sheridan had me thinking about was the whole issue of the whole technological environment. You know, technology used to be the big name people, the now defunct Nortels and the Cisco and the Huawei and the everybody else. But now technology has actually been democratized as well, so that very ordinary people now have access to very powerful equipment. Yes? And we have our policy should reflect that recognition of innovation that enables citizens to help themselves. And I love the idea of the community networks. And we really will have to do some serious legislative reform and address the regulatory environment if we are going to be able to foster that level of innovation and people, making use of the technology to improve their circumstances. And this very, very busy, and it isn't as busy as it ought to be, but this just tries to show the ecosystem for response in a disaster situation. There are very, very many players involved, many complex relationships. This is just a fraction of what it could be. But in order for there to be an appropriate response in a disaster situation, relationships have to be established. These procedures have to be articulated. The connections between the utilities or the national security, all of these things have to be pre-programmed. And there has to be a communication plan that everybody is aware of. And there must be triggers. So when this happens and this happens, when the wind exceeds X, it triggers this, and the people from national security have to be prepared, and all of these things have to be done way in advance. And when you've developed your plans, and of course, I've mentioned the amateur radio operators, a very important stakeholder in this whole thing, especially during the disaster. All of these things have to be put in place before, long before. And when it has been done, you have to exercise those plans to make sure they work. So the response in a disaster situation, and this is what we're saying, that in the preparatory stages, you have to be conscious that we build, and for those countries that have been devastated, rebuild telecommunications and power networks with redundancy and with resilience, right? So resilience has to be part of the thinking when you're planning your networks, when you're planning your systems. Recovery, rapid recovery and resilience have to be part of that thinking process. Then we have to consider the use of new technologies, right? We were talking about, yes, fiber is wonderful, but you have to put the poles and string the fiber or dig the ducts or however you do it, direct, buried. It is susceptible. But there are technologies now, the low Earth orbiting satellites, the medium Earth orbiting satellites, those constellations, they are being launched over the course of this year. That might be something we want to consider, because I understand that the prices of satellite services, which in the past was prohibitive, it's now on par with terrestrial services. So satellite, the LEOs, the MEOs, those are things that you absolutely have to look at. Things like, they're nano satellite technologies, something that could also serve in building resilient networks. Then we have the Google Loon, yes, the Balloon project. Those are things that we would like to consider. TV white space. Right? There are a lot of things that are coming to the fore, and they could help us in building that resiliency and leapfrogging. As I said, rather than putting back what you had, invest in some of the new technologies that would really lend a greater degree of sustainability to your networks. Right, and in one of the challenges, of course, when you had the devastation, the first responders, are they going to be able to respond if their families are distressed, if there's no food, if there's no water? Have you provided secure locations, earthquake resistant, hurricane resistant facilities with all that they need to enable them to respond? These are things that we have to think about. And then the whole flow of communications. Is it that you have systems that allow the governments to communicate? The government officials, first responders, these are things that have to be planned before. And of course, prearranged relationships for fuel, water, and so on. And also, I want to speak to the issue of security, because what happened in the region, a lot of looting, and you understand the desperation of people. And one incident, right after this storm, Irma passed, I was able to call and speak to some of our colleagues in the British Virgin Islands. I actually made a call, and 2 days later, I couldn't. And I'm wondering, well, this is strange, but someone had people had started stealing the generators. Yes? So those are all of these things you really need to take into consideration. And one of the other things I think someone mentioned, I think Carlton mentioned it, we need to cultivate a new generation of ham operators. I'm very sorry, but I think based on some of the interactions I've had, and it's quite remarkable, in July last year, we spoke to the ham operator, the person in Trinidad and Tobago, and we were asking him about the operators. How is it going? You know, we have to make sure that there's a certain readiness and an organization that would enable them to support the government and the first responders in a disaster situation. And then in September, you know what happened, and we discovered that there was indeed a handful of people who were doing yeoman service to keep communications going, but generally it was a very chaotic, a very disorganized a situation. And this is what we have to do. The ham operators, I don't see young ham operators. And we need to cultivate, we need to get that interest going. And the other thing is the ham internet connectivity, that integration I understand that the ITU is doing a project, I think it's WinLink, yes, with some of the countries here, they've just started. And that is something that I would absolutely encourage. And we need to do a lot more research into the emerging technologies and to see what will serve us best. And I am very optimistic for the LEOs and the MEO technology. It removes a tremendous, if the prices are indeed comparable to terrestrial services, this is a viable option that we should seriously consider as we continue to see the manifestations of climate change in our region. And with that, I am going to end this presentation. I thank you for your attention.
If we have any question, I could take one or two. Thank you very much, SG. That was quite clear, and I think in the context of what we're talking about, the network resilience, we've heard about the community networks option and its possible applicability right here in Suriname, and the work of the Commission for Caribbean Communications Resilience, and we'll certainly be sharing the recommendations that come out of that. Okay, so folks, we are at the lunchtime now. Lunch will be served right next door, like through this wall. And yes, indeed. Yeah. I'm kidding. I say through the wall, but you know, I thought you would be able to figure that out for yourself. So as we, oops, wrong people. 1 second. Yes. As we do so, I'd like to ask that we come back in the room and be ready for 1:30, because our presentation this afternoon, first presentation this afternoon is being done by a remote presenter, and the time is fixed. So we'll want to start at 12:30 exactly. I'd just like to again recognize our sponsors. Google, locally here, the ATV networks, and also Google, ARIN, ICANN, LACNIC, Facebook, and the Internet Society. This evening, at the end of today's program from 5 o'clock, the TAS has kindly arranged a little networking cultural event for us at the pier in the back there behind the hotel. That starts at 5 p.m. and you are all invited to be there. So, as regards the video and audio coverage here, we have a request from the camera persons that we do the questions at the mics, please, because when we move it all around the room, the cameras have difficulty in following, but the cameras are positioned such that they can easily and quickly pick up persons at the mic. So that would be a request from us. So we'll break now for lunch, and I ask that you return at 1:30, sorry. At 1:30, right back here, and we'll get the session started on data protection, which promises to be quite interesting. Thank you.